Доброго дня усім учасникам другого дня вебінару. Ми підсумовуємо результати впровадження пілотного проєкту запровадження програми контролю сирого молока на базі молочного модуля у 2021 році. Наголошую, так, результати 2021 року сьогодні у фокусі, але дуже тішить те, що області не зупиняються, набирають обертів і мають дуже хороші позитивні результати. У нас буде змога з цими областями теж сьогодні поспілкуватися. А власне,
to talk to all of you today. And the purpose of our today's discussion is recorded in our agenda. So I will remind you that we will work today in a bit of a different format, but for the same approach. We'll have a short break between the two discussion rounds. And the purpose for the discussion round one is to discuss technical issues like sampling, transportation, and testing of samples. And this discussion round will be moderated by the chief expert of the dairy module, Tetiana Harkavenko. After the break, we will continue the discussion, but it will be a more technical specific issue on the dairy module and the sampling act. And we will discuss how we can organize our work so that filling up this sampling act is user-friendly and convenient for you, and we will try to take into consideration all the suggestions that you have given us. So before we begin the first discussion round, we have a couple of interactive moments. If you are with us today for the first time, I want to ask you to use this Mentimeter. This is a website. You can see the link, menti.com. And you see all the questions that we will be asking using this Mentimeter. And Olena will help you do that. So Olena, the floor is over to you. Yes, I already sent the link to the chat with the entry code. And you will see the QR code on the screen as well. And the first short question for us is going to be kind of the icebreaker for us to get into the working mode. And the question is, describe your expectations from today's webinar using one word. And when we see some inputs, we will present them on the screen. And the most frequently mentioned word will be our kind of highlight of the day. Hearing. Someone wants to be heard. Okay, I'm sure that we will do that. Milk, knowledge, answers, additional knowledge, and yes, of course, answers to the questions. Thank you for asking us all these questions through all the surveys and communications in your oblast, and just by sending us your individual questions in different formats. Someone said training, someone said relevance. Competence. Yes, I am sure having competent answers is very important, and we have a lot of competent professionals here with us. Knowledge and experience of others. Yes, let us take it as a slogan for our today's discussion. We are ready to share, and I hope that you will be ready to share with us as well, and you will participate actively and share your experience. Understanding of what should be done. Everyone wants to know what is the action plan or to-do plan. Transportation, we see. Transportation, I think you mean transportation of samples. Again, experience of others. Knowledge and competences are leading answers. Communications.
Вміння. Мені здається, на цьому ми завершили наш семінар.
Know how, meaning knowing what to do and how to do. I think we talked about that yesterday when we discussed the importance of training. But as you see, 31 participants voted. This is not so much. We have 152 participants. The reason why we are making this interactive polling, because we will have other questions for you to answer later in the day. And we would like you to be able to participate so that there are no technical barriers. We want all of you to speak up. So we have 153 now participants, so you can enter Menticom either through your phone or through a computer. You will be asked to enter this code. And please make sure to join because we need to get your answers.
Yes, Irina, just as I mentioned also yesterday, this is really a kind invitation for you to participate to the discussion. We really need your inputs here. So we just have 33 active participants in the Mentimeter, and please don't be shy. So we really need your inputs and feedback. If you have any problems in connecting, let us know so that we can help you.
Марко закликає активніше вас голосувати.
Yes, thank you, Marco. This is a very simple algorithm. You go to the website menti.com and you will have an entry field to enter your code 27927003, and then you click vote button and you will see our questions. You just need to give one word, and perhaps you will change your opinion on the website. We have different interpretations of the word experience, experience of others. I think experience would be a bigger word if you just use one word and all of you use the same word, but I think, yes, knowledge and experience are most frequently given answers. And Mykola Vasilievich from the State Food Safety Service talked about how some oblasts are implementing the project compared to others, and we were able to see the map, and we saw how the labs and delegates and market operators and milk collection points are registered. And it's interesting to know that some oblasts have become bright blue, indicating that the number of pilot project participants is higher there. And it will be interesting to hear their experience today. So I encourage Sumy, Mykolaiv, Poltava, Vinnytsia, Cherkasy Oblast to join in today and share your experience. So we will have very specific discussions today. You see the topics of our discussion questions. So we have now 51 participants who voted. Not bad. It's 1/3 of you. While you are trying to navigate this menti.com tool, I will briefly summarize the first day of our discussion. Following the presentation of Mykola, we were able to see that the number of the pilot project participants has increased significantly compared to 2020. This is great news, and I want to thank everyone who worked hard to do that. Also, I want to note we have 490 registered FBOs. They're registered there, but only 440 are active users. So the operator might have registered and then was deactivated. I know that there are some cases of the operators that discontinued their operations. They closed down and no longer are operating in the dairy sector. But there are also other reasons. When the name of an operator was entered incorrectly or the registration data was changed. But there are 490 and 440, there is a difference. So we see that there are reasons why the operators are refusing to use the dairy module. And based on the data presented by Oksana Novokhatnya from the Food Safety Department, we can see that the number of active operators that are regularly testing their raw milk in authorized labs, they're even smaller. They're only 370. And that really makes us think. So I believe this topic will be important for us to discuss today when we have Q&A session. To find out from the operators what are the reasons for these gaps. Okay, so we have 170 participants in the call and 64 are actively using menti.com. We are asking you all to find a possibility to register in this website menti.com, because we will offer you codes, or you can, using your own phone with your camera, just click on the QR code, which you will see on the screen. And every time Olena will show it on the screen, you can just put your phone camera on the QR code and you will quickly get to the website and participate in the polling. We have very interesting and very practical questions prepared for you. So please participate. So it's already 1:15. I think that's enough time for you to practice using menti.com. That's very easy, and it's very important for us to get your feedback. And it's my pleasure to introduce the senior expert of the dairy sector of the QFTP Swiss-Ukrainian project. Swiss-Ukrainian project and the previous milk safety product is the direct partner of the state service in implementing the raw milk control program. And for those of you who were not with us yesterday, I want to remind you that we started working with the state service in 4 regions: Vinnytsia, Poltava, Kharkiv, and Mykolaiv. And back then, we didn't have the Order 118 outlining the mandatory requirements to the producers in the frequency of raw milk control with specific indicators, the TBC and SCC, because that really specifies the frequency and the target indicators. And back then, we only had 4 regions and the order was not issued. But at the end, we already had the draft pilot project using European experience. And we were evaluating that experience, and the Swiss program was able to help the labs be better equipped. And together with the state service, we have developed this software called Dairy Module, which now has more than 800 users. Tetiana, today we are discussing the topics in a more specific way. So please go through this and help us.
Я рада вас всіх вітати.
Welcome to all the participants. Glad to see you're in good mood. It was nice to see your expectations from today, like experience, knowledge, competence. I do hope there will be a proactive discussion today, and we are going to get answers to those questions we received throughout the analysis of the reports from the State Food Safety Service. We can split those questions into groups. The first require just clarifications, other group requires discussion. Probably we also got some feedbacks and recommendations based on examples from Oblast, and we are going to comment on this today. Would be nice to see the discussion feature not just the keynote speakers, but also other participants of this meeting. So why the whole question of sample selection, transportation, and testing is important for us? You know, yesterday we heard about the results of raw milk sample testing carried out by authorized labs in the scope of pilot project implementation. And we were able to see how differing the results were. Some displaying quite offshoot values. Why we got the results like that? One of the opinions from the participants attributed it to incorrect entering of the results in the dairy module. Yes, there is a human factor at play, and people can do mistakes, given that labs have to operate 5-6 digit numbers, but I don't think this is the decisive factor. Moreover, as Irina mentioned, these results were effectively cut off to focus on the correct scope of results provided by the most labs. We also heard the report from Bogdan Pustovit, who said that throughout the survey among the pilot project participants, the following problem was revealed when labs would receive already boiled samples, boiled milk samples. And the question arose as to how these samples just made it to the lab at all. Definitely those should not be included in the survey, and there should be a non-compliance act issued instead. And definitely if those were included, that contributed to having some erroneous results. The most important factors of influence on the results are those related to sample collection and transportation. Even if the producer maintains all the standards, but a delegate uses non-sterile tools to collect the sample or fails with personal hygiene and does not observe the transportation requirements, then whichever method a lab uses, the result will be invariably not valid. So I'd like everyone to participate in this discussion as much as possible, because by jointly seeking answers, correct answers, we will be able to produce reliable, valid results throughout the project. I'd like to invite to the discussion representatives of the central office, Mikola Belos, Deputy Director of the Food Safety, Veterinary Medicine and Organic Production Control Department at the State Control Administration, and Oksana Novokhatka, Deputy Head of the Administration and Head of the Food Safety Unit at the Department of Foodstuff and Veterinary Medicine Department from the State Food Safety Service. We are also going to have a representative of the State Research Institute on Vet Science, Natalia Kuryata, and head of the microbiology tests lab, Alla Kursheva. Not to forget that we expect the rest of participants to engage. You can raise your hand and you will be given the floor. Otherwise, use the chat. We are going to monitor your inputs there. And we hopefully will be able to provide competent answers to the questions you may pose there. So let us start the discussion with another round of our Mentimeter survey. So you do know that the concept has a number of potential sample collection agents, professionals in the area. So it's interesting to see who is the one most frequently engaged in sample taking and sample collection in Ukraine. So please use Mentimeter with applicable code to enter the site and vote. I'd like to invite Elena Rodnina, our professional, for a more detailed explanation how to correctly vote here. So again, the question about who is the sample collection delegate in your oblast, and the range of options includes lab professional from the regional lab, lab professional from the rayon level lab, state inspection officer, authorized vet, or another person. So we'd love to hear from you through your votes, how it happens in your oblast. So if you have professionals from different categories participating in sample collection, you may be able to have more than one correct answer, ticking off the correct option. Yeah, right. You can see the QR code. You can use alternatively to go to the site for voting. Or you can use your browser. Again, all you have to do is key in the code mentioned on screen, and then you will be let in and you can vote. Again, more than one correct answer can be selected. You cannot provide a wrong answer otherwise. And we are going to see what are the results. We already have 40 votes. Let me show you the QR code one more time to make it more convenient for you. If you're not able to enter the site, let us know via the chat. My colleagues will help me out with it. Or you can use your mic to tell us what the problem is. So again, the question is, who's the sample collection selection delegate in your oblast? A lab guy from the regional lab, from rayon lab, a state inspection officer, authorized vet, or another person. And we have 64 participants with their votes.
Бачу, що є повідомлення в чаті.
There are messages in the chat. Probably people were not able to enter the site, but they nevertheless try to let their vote known.
проголосувати. Далі після цього ви можете, якщо є така можливість, не виходити з Mentimeter.
And actually, you can stay on that site on menti.com because later on we are going to have another voting.
67 учасників проголосували.
So we have 67 votes.
У нас було 70, трошки більше за 70.
Before that, we had slightly more than 70, and I think we can show the results. There's a comment in chat. If we don't have the module started yet and the samples are not taken yet, okay, in this case, you just don't vote. If you don't have it in place, then don't vote.
Отже, 73 учасники, думаю, я можу відкривати, так?
Okay, so we have 73, and we can open the results.
Так, у нас досить цікаві відповіді ми отримали.
Quite an interesting range of votes we have here.
У відсотковому відношенні, то
Percentage-wise,
найбільше здійснюють
the most votes have been for the authorized vet option.
21 та 22
Still, we have 21 and 22% respectively, corresponding to the lab professional from, in the first case, the regional lab, and the second one for the Ryan level lab. If these two are added, then the total lab indicator will be more than that of vet office, approved authorized vets. During the yesterday's survey, we had differing opinions. Some participants saying more in favor of lab representatives for that purpose, and other rather telling that the lab should be focusing on testing and sample collections should be done by someone else. And interestingly, 5% of the voters mentioned other persons engaged in sample taking. Would be nice to hear from you, the 5% guys. Who does it in your case? Given the concepts approved, the delegates should only include the first 4 categories mentioned here. So we'd like to hear from you to better understand the reasons why other people are involved in sample collection and what are the benefits of it. Okay, I think we can start discussion.
І якраз таки щас. Так, Олена, так. Тому у мене до вас питання. Які
I
все
have a
ж
question for you.
є переваги того, що
What are the benefits and limitations of the situation in your oblast in terms of when samples are collected by lab technicians or the state inspection officers or authorized vets? In some oblasts, we saw that state inspection officers do it. So we'd like to hear from you. We have a comment in the chat, Tatiana. We used other persons. Before we were told that we can abstain from voting because we don't have the procedure in place. Okay, thank you. Your answer is taken. And I see the hand raised. It's from Mykolaiv Oblast. Ivan Getzler from the main department of Food Safety Service. Dear Ivan, please have your mic on.
Да, вас перекреслено. Так, тепер чуємо.
Миколаївська область, ви ж знаєте, да, вона є з одних з 4 пілотів.
You do know that Mykolaiv Oblast is one of the 4 pilot ones, but I'd like to comment as to why we selected the authorized vet. Yes, lab technicians would be a better option because we better know how to do it correctly. We looked for this option, but why we didn't have it? Because we have just one lab, and the 3 interdistrict labs that we have around, they potentially could do it, but there were some technical reasons for them not being able to ensure proper transportation of samples, and it was necessary to create some interim collection points for that purpose. So the samples would be collected there and then sent to the lab. And that would require more transport, and that was suboptimal, with lots of driving meant, with lots of vehicles needed. We had to let go of that option, though it would definitely be ideal, given that lab technicians are professional, they're independent, they're not depending on either vet clinics or state inspection officers, and they're well able to collect samples. But again, we have vets in our oblast, and they are provided with transportation, and it is easier for them. So it was easier for them to collect those samples. So that's it from my side. All right, thank you. A question, if you can, to Ivan. So from your position, I understood that that your key option is the vet. Yeah, we had a third option to deal with oblast level lab, but the logistics was even worse because they would have to send 5 vehicles along the very long distance routes in one go, in one day. So the key problem with you is transportation. Yes, and not just transportation, but also transportation time. And availability of professionals and proper staffing of labs were just secondary considerations. They do have some professional staff there in the labs. But vets are a better option because they have transport of their own, and they have specific times that can be used to go and take samples, given that the number of husbandry farms has been reduced. So they have like more time on their hands. So you have just one option for that or more? No, we have one option. I am telling that when we looked at the concept, we had all the options in mind, but then we had to check for benefits and weak points, and we stayed with vets because of, again, great number of vets, transportation available to them. So it was easier for us to use this model.
Той момент, якщо фахівець лабораторії, то тут постає питання збереження конфіденційності.
And yeah, well, confidentiality requirements. If you have a lab technician coming, they clearly know who they collected from. I do know that in every lab, the sample collection unit never discloses the information who they collected from. Yeah, the samples are collected by a unit representative, and they have confidentiality requirements and procedure to be followed. This is what I have had in mind, that we should be mindful of confidentiality requirements, and we should check for them. This is very important. And those authorized vets did they undergo some training? You know, when the loan state control was approved, those vets were approved and linked to specific farms, and the law provided for a specific description of control procedures and measures. And so the vets underwent the training, but it was not specific to sample collection. And later on, we addressed the State Food Safety Service to use this MOCA program that all the inspectors have to use, to have them included, have these vets included into this training program. So all of them went through this extramural, this distance training on sample collection, and they got relevant knowledge. And also we have the monitoring in place in our rayons, and some of the vets had been trained even before that. So sometimes there are cases when the vets in charge of veterinary science and authorized vets are the same person, so they're competent on a wider range of subjects, if you want, in this area. And when this is rolled over to the whole of Ukraine, probably it would be nice to have another webinar or seminar for everyone authorized to do sample collection, to train them better in a uniform way, how to properly collect samples, how to do it to required standards. It would be correct, because this MOCA program, it is about the state control, and they have lots of nice things. Tools are described and methods are described, but I think that the dairy module has some specific features of its own. So it would be nice to have a uniform training for everyone involved in sample collection, to see that the whole country works to the same standard. We definitely don't need the situation when each oblast has its own criteria for sample collection. Yeah, thank you.
I understand how you do it, and perhaps others have a different experience and they can share it. Thank you, Mykola. I see some hands raised, and I see that Marco Nardi wanted to comment perhaps the experience of Ivan. Marco, please go ahead. And after Marco, I see some other participants. We will give you the floor after Marco as well.
Yes, thank you, Tatiana. Well, thanks of all. I want to say thanks to Ivan. He's been with us since a long, long time, so it's always a pleasure to see his interaction, very active participation. So, and I actually have a question for him. So, as I understand, in this oblast, the veterinary officer are engaged in collecting the samples, but there might be other opportunities through the laboratory network. But do you see any issue right now with the veterinary officer collecting the sample? Or I turn the question, do you think it would be better that the laboratory representative collecting the sample rather than the veterinary officer? Or you are happy with veterinarians being engaged in this activity?
Well, I was the participant of the training in Switzerland, so I know how it is done in other countries. So this is my position. This is not the position of the state service or the main department in Mykolaiv Oblast. I think it should be done by the market operator and the transportation as well to deliver it to the lab. But the situation that we have in Ukraine has some obstacles. So the second option for Ukraine, the better preference would be for the labs to do the sample collection, because the authorized vet have other jobs to do, and to put this extra load of the responsibility for them is not right. But of course, we use this third option for us, the authorized vet, because for the pilot project to work, we needed to understand how to do it quickly and make it possible, and to fulfill the task of the pilot project to do the sample collection, regularity, transportation. In the future, if our three inter-district labs have enough vehicles and technicians, we will be able to take this other option and to engage lab technicians. And with my boss here from the main department, we have discussed this issue, and she also sees that it's important to engage the labs, not just in sample collection, but also in testing. So not just one lab does the testing, but other three inter-district labs are also involved in testing. But it's the issue of vehicles availability and accreditation. But if the pilot project allows this in the concept, we can do that.
Thanks.
Так, хотілося б слово надати.
I would like to give the floor to Donetsk Oblast, the main department. Olena, please go ahead. Yes, thank you. Well, I would like to say that in Donetsk Oblast, in the beginning, we used the authorized labs to do sample collection and transportation, but because not all authorized labs, unfortunately, are accredited using the international standards. They are accredited, but based on Ukrainian standards. So that's why we have to consider other models to provide other FBOs to participate in the raw milk control program. So we think that technically the national standards are compliant with international standards. So perhaps for the time being, while the raw milk control program becomes mandatory in this transition period, perhaps we could consider this option of using national standards, provided that the labs participate in the testing rounds, in the professional testing rounds, although they already participate. And along the international methods of testing, they prove to have accurate results. But I have a question to Ivan. If you consider this model of using authorized vets or inspectors in sample collection, how do you resolve the issue of sterile containers, providing them with all the sterile equipment and sterile containers? The situation in this case, as we say, we cannot really tell you how to do it, but we use contracts. There are districts that made contracts on sample collection and transportation, and they're using this money to buy the sterile equipment and containers. Perhaps this is not the best way, but we are also buying in our main department. We are buying these sterile packages for them, for the regular sample collection. And the third way that we are using, this is mostly used for the operators that are supplying their milk to the companies that are exporting their products for Europe. So these FBOs are procuring this equipment themselves, perhaps because they don't really trust our equipment or our containers. So we have 2 or even 4 operators like that who are providing this sterile equipment and containers. So these 3 options that we use. But now we are also considering the issue that we will meet together to identify the ways to provide everyone with the same containers and equipment so that everyone is using the same way. I hope that in the nearest future we will make a decision on that, because we have been only doing that for 6 months in Mykolaiv Oblast, and it's really hard to cover all the gaps at the same time, because we need to do a training, we need to resolve transportation, then we also had to deal with the issue of expert conclusion or expert report. So it's really difficult to have the same model ideally working in the same way for everyone. But I think when Ukraine starts using the same approaches, because the concept is changing and the legislation is changing. I would like to add very briefly, I think it's not a violation if the FBO representative buys the sterile containers for sampling, for sample collection. They should be interested in doing that for the sample collection to be done in line with requirements and for them to get the accurate results. Thank you. I want to give the floor to Igor Prisezhnuk. He raised his hand and I saw other 2 hands. And we also have a lot of comments in the chat. I will read them later on. Yes, thank you. Hello. I have one question and one comment on this topic of discussion. I'm representing Milk Producers Association, and I will continue stressing what I already said, that you should consider using licensed vets, because starting from 2023, they will be under your control, because the law on veterinary medicine will be put into force and they will be given this function and possibility, and you will have the power to control them. Also, don't forget about private-public partnership. Yes, the operators are interested to have accurate results and accurate sample collection, and I'm sure that 90% of such operators are open for that. Of course, there will be some operators that will want to cover up some shortcomings, but after some time, it will be better. The situation will become better. Also, I'm convinced that the costs of operators for these disposable sterile containers are so small, so it's not going to be a problem. It's just a question of how you approach them, how you talk to them. We as association can also support you with that, because we want to work openly. And that was a comment. And the question is, I apologize because I'm engaged in this, I'm not engaged in this sample collection process. Can you tell me, is it one sample that is collected or 2 samples, like one going to testing and another for storage? Because I'm not really aware of that. In case when the test results are objected, you can send it to the reference lab, because there is a human error and the company, an operator may not agree with the test result, because, you know, errors are possible. Igor, I can respond to that, or Tatiana can respond to that, but I would like to take this question. A parallel sample, if it is collected, if there is no trust, it cannot be stored. It can be sent to the reference lab at the same time in the timeline specified, or this sample will be just populated with bacteria, because we only give 24 hours for the transportation and delivery. So it's only because of the time limits. Yes, the law specifies that the samples are not collected for the products that are that cannot be stored. Yes, if the milk, the TBC is tested only within 3 days, and the results will be different. Thank you. And thank you for your proposal. And I would like to invite the main department in Vinnytsia Oblast. Andrei. Yes, hello, dear colleagues. Very happy to see everyone and to participate in this discussion. As of now, in Vinnytsia Oblast, we have lab technicians engaged in sample collection, but considering our experience in Vinnytsia Oblast and the requirements of the law allows the market operators to identify the procedure of sample collection and their testing. And also considering the limited resources of the food safety service and the workload on the state inspectors, because it is a huge workload, and especially when there are irregular control measures starting to take place. If the state inspectors are engaged in sample collection, believe me, now we have 30 to 50 market operators and milk collection points participating. The inspectors will not be able to do all this sample collection. Also, it takes a lot of financial resources for traveling, and it will all be an extra burden for the operators, for the producers. And you see, in the dairy sector, there is already they're paying for transportation and testing. So I think it's a critical issue for the milk producers. So I can speak for Vinnytsia Oblast. I will, of course, consult with representatives of the project to consider the issue of engaging the milk producers into the sample collection and transportation it to the lab to reduce the load, the workload. I'm saying this because the law allows us to do that for regular or irregular inspections. When we see this act that will be shortly put into force, we using the irregular inspections, we can verify the results. We can verify the sample collection procedure. The law clearly specifies that the producer, in case of incompliances, they have to inform the state food safety service. And if they are not doing it within 2 days' time, then the state inspector will enforce some actions without any warning. And there are some serious sanctions. So my opinion that I have, we need to think about this possibility for market operators to be involved in sample collection and transportation. Thank you, Andrei. I also want to read some of the messages in the chat to hear the position of others. So the first one, that the lab technician conduct sample collection with the requirements of sterile equipment use, so there is 100% assurance of correct procedures and correct transportation requirements. So this is a high guarantee of getting accurate results. Unfortunately, it's difficult to do that in our region. The main question about the quality of sample collection, availability of vehicles, only the lab technician can ensure the quality of sample collection. Another important issue is temperature requirements, thermal bags availability. Only lab technicians understand all the necessary requirements. We need to have video training for the sample collection. We support this idea with the video training materials for the sample collection. Thank you for giving your comments in the chat and summarizing our discussion. Who should do the sample collection? We can say that most of the participants tend to believe that the most accurate sample collection can be done by lab technicians. But because of some restrictions, because the labs can be located far away from the operators, other professionals are involved, like inspectors or authorized vets that are located in the closer proximity. Also, there is an opinion to use licensed vets. And one of the oblasts who is a pioneer in this project mentioned that even producers can be involved. So I think this is still a question that we need to discuss further. And it would be interesting to hear the representatives of the headquarters, what they think about it. But I think we already took a lot of time for discussing this first question. So I suggest we continue discussion at the end. If you still have open questions, we can take another round of discussion. The second question is for you now to answer in Mentimeter. Who in your oblast provides transportation of samples? Because sample collection and sample transportation are very much connected, but we want to focus now on specific transportation. Who is most frequently used for transporting your samples? Authorized labs, milk producers, milk collection points, processors, authorized vet, or another person? Olena, please help us with voting. Yes, thank you. You see the code in the chat. These are the same codes actually, so please go to the menti.com website, enter the code, or use the QR code. We have 38 participants who already voted. Thank you. If you have any technical issues, let us know. So, who transports samples in your oblast? Authorized lab, producers, milk collection points, processors, authorized vet, inspector, or another option. We have 53 votes.
Колеги, мені здається, що була ще пропозиція від
Dear colleagues, we seem to have a proposal from the Poltava Oblast to join the discussion, and maybe in the meantime, while we are voting, we could hear from them.
колеги з Полтавщини.
Sure.
Готові підключатися?
Poltava, can you?
Чудово.
Okay,
Тільки у вас знову вимкнутий мікрофон, пані Наталія.
please switch on your mic.
Можемо починати?
Так.
Can be? Yeah.
Я так розумію, що всі хочуть почути, як ми змогли
I think everyone wants to know how we were able to drastically increase the number of farms joined the dairy module in our oblast in such a short time. So I'm the module administrator, and we were involved in the pilot, and it was not news for us, though the results were not really up to the expectations, and it was because just one lab was involved in the dairy module connected to it, and logistically speaking, it wasn't entirely convenient to deliver samples there. So we carried out an analysis to see where the farms are located. We had a number of meetings, online, offline ones, with milk collection points, with farms. We had information letters sent over to them explaining state requirements on state control of their milk. And there was a directive issued last year requiring specific designated officers assigned. Same went about sample collection delegates and regular monthly reporting on that. And I think this specific separation of responsibilities between all the process participants, making every one of them better understand what is his or her limits of responsibility, what are the things that have to be done. This really contributed to many more FOPs joining, FBOs joining the system. So we had all the information included, mentioning delegates, and we had at least 2 delegates assigned. We had those responsible for sample transportation mentioned, whether from among the FBOs or the labs. And we mentioned the exact location of the lab for testing of those samples. The form also included columns with information how often this milk control module is being used, what are the reasons if not, and so on. And that has been the monthly information that allows us to timely feedback or react to any handicaps in the use of the dairy module. We also created information forms for the labs with complete information about milk collection points, with mentions of sample delegates, with their contact details, to ensure prompt communication and prompt solving of any issue, whether in relation to documents or otherwise. So the information that we managed to collect and those forms that we designed allowed us having a full set of information about what is happening, what are the trends, which corrective measures can or should be taken to improve the situation. Being the oblast administrator, I also moderate messenger groups with oblast level inspectors and participants, and this really allows fast-paced communication. So now we have 4 labs involved in the state milk control system in Pyryatin, Sheshatska, others. We have at least 2 sample collection delegates identified.
зразків. Всі делегати відбору перед виконанням своїх повноважень пройшли навчання.
Each delegate has been trained before starting the job on how to properly collect samples. We also made a video on that for delegates to use as a training material for themselves.
Це питання вже обговорюється. Класно було б, якби цей ролик був професійно знятий.
Well, it would be nice to have this video redesigned in a professional way to probably roll it out among others.
Наталя Миколаївна, дуже цікаво. Я не знаю, чи ви нас чуєте.
Natalia, I'm not sure if you hear us, but we are losing the sound from you.
Е,
We
Я
have some technical glitches.
що у вас уже майже 200 учасників з боку приватного сектора.
Am I right in assuming that you have nearly 200 participants
Наталя Миколаївна,
in your system? Natalia,
на жаль, ми втратили зв'язок.
I think we lost her for the moment. Yeah, we lost the connection, but thank you, Natalia, for providing this detailed description of the algorithm of how to correctly set up this raw milk control program in the oblast. I'm sure the rest of participants will like it and will gladly learn from your experience to correctly set up their bit of program in their oblast. And now we're ready to see the voting results. We have 75 voters, and this is the distribution across the whole range of categories. So we see that for the most part, samples are transported and are the responsibility of milk producers. To a bit lesser extent, the logistical capacities of authorized labs are used. Transportation by authorized vet officers ranks third. And further down, we have the rest of the categories. Quite an interesting set of results, I would say. And it would be nice to hear from you, dear participants. We'd like you to comment the results, explaining the reasons why your oblast has opted for this or that type of transportation.
Учасники, хотілося б вас почути.
Dear participants, anyone?
Що стосується Полтавської області, то в нас
As regards the Poltava Oblast.
Так, слухаємо вас, пані Наталя.
Yeah, please go on, Natalia.
можу так говорити. Що стосується Полтавської області, то у нас
In Poltava Oblast, the transportation is predominantly done by authorized vet officers.
господарств, які здійснюють транспортування самостійно.
The number of farms doing it independently is really small. For the most part, it's about vets, authorized vets. Just as a backup option, we've included lab representatives as designated milk sample collection delegates. I think it would be premature to authorize FBOs to do the transportation. First, we need to see how the whole picture unfolds and what are the results in terms of testing and results of that in terms of TBC and other parameters. And maybe when we are sure and satisfied that the milk complies with standards and requirements, we will be ready to transfer this transportation responsibility onto FBOs.
Ринку здійснювати, але відбір покладається саме на
So at the moment, the sample collection is bestowed on authorized vet officers. I think that in our circumstances, this is the optimal option for us. Just a question to you, if you allow.
Так, запрошуємо вас до слова.
Yeah, please.
У мене таке чисто людське питання. Відбір проводить уповноважений ветеринар.
So vets, authorized vets do the collection, and the farm has to transport the sample. But if you have the vets already present at the farm taking the sample, why would you then leave it to the farm to transport the sample? He can as well take the taken sample and transport it himself. Am I right or not?
Ми пропонуємо господарству різні варіанти.
Well, we offer the farms various options of becoming involved in the raw milk control program. The authorized vet can have a route, logistically, to go to several farms to collect samples there. And whenever a farm thinks that it's easier for them to have this vet officer transport their sample, definitely it can be done like this. If the farm rather would transport the sample itself, we are very glad to allow them to do it. So it's individually, it is decided individually. So we always explain FBOs about benefits and weak points of this or that modus, and they can opt for whichever suits them best in order to comply with statutory requirements. Yeah, thank you, Natalia. Still, I have a question. Have you ever come across a situation when one thinks that the other will transport and the reverse is true and things gets on hold in absence of established model, I mean? We have quite close cooperation with each FBO and with a clear distribution of roles, with clear understanding of their respective roles. It's really easy to cooperate with them. If an FBO is able to ensure proper transportation with all the cool chain requirements and so on, then it's his responsibility. And if he faults at some stage, this will result in bad test indicators and test results. So I'd say that for the most part, the majority of FBOs have agreed to have authorized vets transport their samples. Anyway. Okay, thank you, Natalia. We do see how good the communication has been between among all the pilot participants. I see hands from Irina particularly. Yeah, without stealing too much time, because we are going to hear a comment from SUME department. But again, when we assessed models during the first phase, when we looked at the FBO model, I can tell you that the model flopped because neither them nor the Central Food Safety Service Office would agree to it, because of complexity of it. And may I remind you that Article 40 is, a product of approximation of our legislation to applicable European regulation, which says about the responsibility of FBOs to engage in the development of procedures, not in sample transportation routine. So the main question is that the sample has to be collected at a place of collection and should comply with applicable standards. when there is a flow of samples taken, a sample is taken from the flow, there should be some calibration routine followed with specific regularity. They have just an automated device in Europe. It's not about delegates, it's about automation, and we are quite far from that. They have an automated procedure there. So at the moment, we speak about the Ukrainian model. We cannot copy the European one. We are still far from it, unfortunately. Yeah. Thank you, Irina, for this explanation, particularly with your reference to the start of the project. And now we are ready to hear from Sumi.
Yes, hello. I don't want to take too much time. All these processes we have completed in June, July last year, so we forgot a little bit some of the things, but nevertheless, we have some experience that we gained out of the more than 3,000 tests in our oblast, more than 1,500. Well, overall for Ukraine, it's more than 3,500, but our share is almost half of all these tests. So, but we use all the labs in milk samples collection, and also some of the staff of the veterinary medicines are involved, but it's all connected to vehicles availability. There are staff, there are trained technicians, there are substitute technicians, 2 delegates are assigned to do the sample collection, but it's the matter of price of transportation. I'm not sure if I should talk about this now or later, but it's in the initial phases, we were doing the transportation, meaning labs, exclusively labs. Some labs were only doing the sample collection, so their task was to collect the samples and deliver them to the 3 labs that were authorized to do the testing. Now we have more labs. Some of them can only do TBC testing once a month, and for SCC, they do another, they deliver tests to other labs. So it's kind of, they share the load. From time to time, considering the high transportation costs, some operators took responsibility to deliver samples. So sample collection, for sure, has to be done by the authorized delegates, a representative of the state. Transportation can be shared. Some can be transported by authorized labs, and other can be transported by operators. And I think it's all connected to the price, because the sample preparation, transportation, it's much more than actually the cost of actual testing. And that's where the problem lies, in my opinion. So many producers started to transport the samples themselves. Also about the place of sample collection and why an authorized person or a delegate cannot always do the transportation, because in some cases, when it is a remote location, like a rural location, the delegate is a local person, but they travel from their home or whatever their workplace, but the place where they have to deliver the samples may be located in much further distance, like dozens of kilometers. So the market operator will do the transportation because the distance is much further for the a sample collection delegate to cover that distance. Thank you. Very interesting. So you have delegates who are collecting the samples, but you have logistics for transporting the samples to authorized labs. So it is also an interesting experience. We are still adjusting this model because labs do not want to do that, because transportation, well, for them, the vehicles is a big restriction. Also, the milk producers mostly do their own transportation. And that can be, that can raise the question of some unexpected, because for transportation to take the sample within 2 hours, the sample collection can be unexpected. The vehicles is a big question. Okay, I would like to hear the positions and opinions of those who have processors who do the transportation of samples. Perhaps you can share this experience of involving processors into sample transportation. Ivan, I see your hand is raised. Well, when we started this work, we had several options. When producers were doing transportation, then when other option was for processors to transport, another option was for lab, and another option for a vet. And because we use two big exporters who export their products to EU and China, this is Bashtanka and Lactalis brands. And they all immediately agreed that they will be doing transportation. So we used that model in the initial stage, and it worked ideally for us. Because even when we had difficulties for operators to join the dairy model, they took the burden for that for themselves. So Lactalis did a lot of work. And we even used them in sample collection, but that was only in the very beginning when we were not sure how to do that. Now the trend is when Bashtanka cheese making factory, they give the vehicle, one delegate from the veterinary clinic goes and travels to different farms and collects samples. Because they're mostly located in the limits of one district. So there are 3 to 4 districts located nearby. So they make the factory gives the vehicle and they do the schedule, and then the authorized vet goes along this route. And now that vehicle also is used to deliver the samples to the authorized labs. In other cases, when there are no such large operators nearby, then producers, there are 2 districts that are located nearby, and the milk producers wanted to do the transportation to make sure that the samples are delivered within the 2 hours window. And now the majority, 30%, I think, is done like this. And when we analyzed how out of all this phytosanitarians and other staff of the state food safety service, we realized that they travel twice a week delivering all the other samples, not just for the milk. And when the boss sits down and says, I don't have vehicles available, then of course they need to calculate the costs and plan who is going where, and planning these vehicles, but it's also during the transitional stage. So we will think how to optimize this process. In the initial phases, we had everyone doing the collection and transportation, all the mentioned options here, both inspectors, labs, producers, processors. So everyone was doing the sampling and transportation, but now with all the adjustments, we only have the authorized vets and the state service. So the operators don't do the sampling anymore. They realize that we can do that. Well, there are some large exporters and they are really helping us. They do a lot of assistance. And we went even further. We asked, we have these large companies and we gave them letters and asked them to write to all other companies in other oblasts to initiate this process, to kind of share their experience and documents to their other companies. And the oblasts are calling to us and asking, okay, what are the legislative provisions? And we give them the number of the orders and European EQ as well, because they need to comply with the auditor's requirements. We participated in some of the audits on milk and also fish products. So we are trying to work in this direction as well. Thank you, Ivan. Perhaps other labs can learn from your experience. And the driving force, I think, here is communication. I see that Marco raised a hand. Marco, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Tatiana. Yeah, I found this mixed approach in the last oblast very interesting, where big processors are contributing by allocating vehicles, and then maybe other delegates would do the sampling, but the processor contribute with the vehicles. And I was wondering whether there are other oblasts where this is actually also happening in Ukraine. Would be interesting to know this, and would also be interesting to understand whether this is might be a potential solution in other oblasts. It's just a general issue to discuss.
Інші учасники хочуть поділитися таким досвідом?
Do we have anyone who would like to share their experience, other oblasts? Because we did not have a high percentage of the processors involved in transportation during voting, but I think we do have other oblasts doing that. I see Sumer raise their hand. Vitaly, please go ahead. In one of our districts, we have the producer helping with sample collection. But when we engaged market operators, the question of unexpectancy is undermined. I apologize. I will interrupt because we are not talking here about unexpected sample collection because the delegates do the collection. We are talking about the processor to take the samples and transport them to the authorized lab. Well, the vehicle has to be ordered and the timeline for delivery is very short. So this is the question. When they collect the samples, they call you and like, okay, we need this vehicle and I don't have the vehicle. So this is the question of planning. And if the processors understand the importance, and we have some of those who understand, they we have some processors who take the delegates and they go to do the sample collection together, and then they can help with transportation as well. But usually the large processors work with large farms. And then the question for transportation and costs are not an issue at all. Usually it's an issue for smaller farms, for small household farms. Then it is a problem for them because the 1,000 hryvnia cost for transportation can be an issue for a small farm. But for, of course, a large 5,000 animal units, it's not a problem. But I think yesterday Irina provided a great option, I think, which could be acceptable for everyone and economically justified, that every day an operator collects the samples, and then, but the sampling collection will not be done by the state representative in this case, but the staff of the operator. Okay, let me respond quickly, Vitaly. This is a European model because these samples are done automatically. The milk is done in the flow. This is very convenient, of course, but it's always kind of planned, and it's so far for Ukraine to do the same way of daily sample collection. We can only dream about this for now. This is the case that I described is taken from European experience. Yes, unfortunately, in our reality, we need to know how the milk is produced by the producer, but we cannot guarantee that for the time before this sample is delivered to the lab, the number of TBC remains the same. But I want to name one company, Lactalis. In March, when we summarized the results with them, I remember how Lactalis mentioned that, yes, it's great, but it will be a high workload for us. They wouldn't want to do this, and they would prefer an independent authorized party to do that. They were, as a milk delegate, doing the sample collection at that time, but they were doing it reluctantly. But perhaps we can go back to that. Well, if it's difficult for them, can you imagine how difficult it is for us? Because what private sector is doing in Europe, we are doing it here ourselves. You mean the Europe has to buy for us the calibration? But the point is that when the market operator develops the procedure for the raw milk control, signing the contract about the service provision with the lab or the veterinary clinic, these services is actually the implementation of the procedures developed by the operator, and then there are no doubts raised. Colleagues, I suggest looking into the chat. Milk producers are interested in having accurate results and timely delivery. Transportation by the vet will be additional financial costs that are not included into the budget. Sampling collection by the authorized lab will guarantee the accuracy and correctness. So most of you think that the labs should do that. Okay. Collection and transportation in Donetsk Oblast was one of the positive indicator to engage the market operators into the program. That's an interesting thought. So I think we can give the floor to the representatives of Donetsk to share what was the driving factor to engage the market operators if the labs are involved. The main thing is communication. Yes, we already heard that from many of the participants, that it's very important to communicate well.
Думаю, що зараз ми можемо перейти до наступної серії.
And I think we are ready for the next bout of questions. As during the time you submitted your reports, we also had questions raised by participants on top of the discussion topics. And some of the most often asked questions concerned the timing of sample transportation to the lab. And that has been due to people reading lots of regulatory documents. And should I mention that Ukraine has several national standards regulating the procedure of milk and dairy product sample transportation. And there is a DSTO, the state standard based on ISO, but these documents provide for differing transportation times. And because of that, I suggested several options, most often mentioned by the delegates and lab representatives, as to what is or are time requirements for sample transportation. The options are as follows. The samples should be delivered to the lab immediately after collected. Next, no later than in 2 hours after collection, then no later than in 4 hours. And the last one, in the shortest possible time, but not more than 24 hours. This is for samples for TBC test. And we can see on the next slide a similar question, but this is for test for samples taken for SCC. And the options are similar: immediately, within 2 hours, within 4 hours, and not more than 24. But there is a fourth option, that it may be possible to conserve samples. Another question from participants requiring clarification: how to collect samples whenever a farm has 5 to 20 animals and have no milk cooling cycle, and rather provide samples and take them to the processing plant immediately after the milk is taken. So we have a certain stipulation in paragraph 7 of Order 118, which says that FBOs may not comply with temperature requirements established in paragraphs 5 or 6 whenever the milk or the colostrum is in compliance with requirements of section 2 of these requirements and is to be processed within 2 hours after being taken, or when higher temperature is needed for technological reason because of the need to produce certain dairy products. I think representatives here who represent authorized bodies or labs may provide a correct answer as to the time limits for sample transportation. Maybe our colleagues from the institute can do it. Yeah, I don't think I need to do my presentation. Or I can do it just in a short way. So when we were to start the dairy module, we had certain objective in mind, and the objective is nearly reached. This is what Irina and Tatiana have mentioned, and as they also mentioned that we still have a way to go to reach Europe. But anyway, the Institute participated in the development of methodological guidelines, which were completed in 2021, and they were approved by the Academic Council at the Institute. And we have 2 methodological guidelines already approved by the Scientific and Methodological Council at the Food Safety Service, which means that these can be used practically. Also by authorized services and labs. And these recommendations, these guidelines are quite harmonized or quite close to European requirements, and they can be of use for both training institutions, higher institutions, and practitioners. So these are the title pages of the approved guidelines, and you can find the list of all the methodological guidelines approved on the website of the Institute. So these guidelines expound the methodology of identifying total bacterial count in raw bovine milk, how the mean geometric average has to be calculated, and how somatic cells count has to be taken in the secretions from the udder and from the raw milk collected. And these guidelines highlight not just the nature of the testing methods, which are again very close to the European standards, but these guidelines also pay a lot of attention to the collection of samples, how these should be stabilized and transported. And according to these guidelines that are ready for use, sample testing shall be carried out by an authorized body accredited under ISO standard in line with applicable national and international standards. This specifically concerns total bacterial count to be carried under ISO 48331, the SCC testing, the microscopic test, in line with ISO 13366. And both standards have reference to the recommended sample collection method, which is in line with ISO 707. It says specifically that samples should be sent to the lab immediately after collected when chilled to 6 degrees, and the time of transportation should be the shortest possible, but within 24 hours. And these recommendations can be used for sending in samples into the lab. And the transportation temp should be within 0 of +4 Celsius throughout the transportation time. And again, it has been mentioned that some farms would not chill the milk they send to processing plants. And again, the standard refers exactly to the sample. We have this reference to the order, the number which I'm always forgetting, 118, right? And the order specifically mentions the milk batch. And when we talk about milk samples, valid samples, then we need to keep with the cold chain requirements and the minimum sample volume, which is 100 millimeters. I think it's very possible to ensure proper temperature requirements in any conditions. You can use water with ice to do it, to make it within the specified range of 6 + 6 degrees. Actually, I told nearly everything we see here. Again, if guidelines are used for sample taking and transportation, again, this is done for SCC test, and it is mentioned that conserving substances may be used, but subject to specific requirements that may be described later on. This is it from my side, not to steal more of your time. Yeah, there's a question in chat to your presentation. Where can one find these methodological guidelines? Well, these have been approved, and these have been transferred to the Food Safety Service for review and final approval. My colleagues have told that probably SAFOSO project rather may help us with printing out these recommendations. So we'd like to hear from you on that. And I think these guidelines are worth it because there are references to applicable regulatory research work done and requirements and so on. Okay, this will make a nice set of guidelines for collection delegates, for the labs, with clear description and explanations on international documents and standards and regulations on that. And I do support your presentation, Natalia, because with multitude of standards around, we definitely need some specific set of recommendations based on those standards that we need to adhere to. And in respect of non-chilled milk from some farms, we need to understand that there is the question of a milk batch sent to the processing plant, and there is a sample. And again, it is not that hard to cool 100 mils of milk for testing purposes, because it's really important for us to know the total bacterial and somatic cell counts, exactly the parameters received right after the milking. Yeah, this is what I said, that 100 mils is not a problem. No sweat around chilling it, it's not about the whole milk batch. The attendees also suggest that electronic versions of these guidelines should be placed on the website of either the Food Safety Service or the Institute, if possible. Right, we are currently working on a new version of our website to make it more relevant for the current needs. I'm not sure about the Food Safety Service, but well, maybe quite shortly we will be able to provide it on our website. Good. We have the hand from Vitaly Kruchkov. Please try to be short and concise because everyone is already dreaming about a little break and coffee. First of all, would be nice to receive some specific, concrete information. I'd like to hear about the concept. I'd like to be able to see the specific changes to the concept. The 2 hours, 4 hours, 24 hours. Next, you say that it's easy to cool down 100 ml of milk. Would be nice, wouldn't it not be nice for the program, for example, to do this practical testing to say that, yes, we tried that with normal conditions, and in that many minutes we were able to do it. Like, a milk can be cooled down in water with ice, say within 10 minutes, for example. Just some specific recommendations, if you want. Yeah, I did understand you. There's a bit of scientific research there, but again, best practices say that 100 ml of milk can be cooled down quite easily. It's not a matter of having liters and liters of it. It's 100 mils. I think everyone knows how to do it. If you need more specific recommendations, we do our best to do this sort of experiment on milk cooling to tell you exactly the results, if you definitely need that. So we still have heard that the suggested temperature range is 0 to 4 for the sample on its way to the lab. And the time frame should be within 24 hours because according to international standards, the lab has to start its testing procedure no later than in 24 hours after the sample has been taken. So I think now we have a full, complete explanation as to the time frame within which the sample has to be taken to the lab. Okay, thanks everyone. I suggest we have a break of 10 minutes and continue at noon. I hope you all agree. And please use the time wisely to think about more questions. Then, okay, enjoy your coffee. We meet back at noon.
Не вимикатися, вимикати камеру, вимикати мікрофон, залишатися на зв'язку. Так, колеги, сьогодні дуже жваві дискусії.
We have very active discussions.
Але ми ще не завершили, нам треба продовжити. Я бачу, пані
And we have not completed
ви з нами?
what we have planned yet. Can we continue, Tatiana? I think we need to wait a couple more minutes. I think people expected another Mentimeter polling about milk, drinking milk with your coffee, but actually not. We are discussing all the serious questions. I remember there was a question about authorized labs. Perhaps the participants did not attend yesterday because not all authorized labs are registered in our module, our dairy module. So the question was that only those who work with the two indicators using ISO methods.
Я думаю, що ми ще будемо говорити про лабораторії і можемо.
I think we will still have time to discuss this topic later. Okay, it's 1 minute past 12. I think we need to start discussion. Okay, I want to make sure that Oksana Novokhatnya is with us.
Оскільки у нас питання, яке потребує роз'яснення з
Because
точки
this question may need some clarification based on the law. Maybe I can quickly call her to make sure she's with us.
Бачу Оксану
I
Миколаївну.
can see Oksana is with us. Yes, I'm with you. Great, thank you. So this question was raised by many of the participants from the oblast. How and where should milk collection, sample collection take place if the farm is a small household farm up to 3 cows and the milk is collected into milk is collected into the tanks or flasks, and then every farmer brings the milk individually. Yes, thank you for this question. Sometimes we really have difficulty to understand how this is done, and I see that we had so many discussions already, but I want to say regarding the sample collection, the information was very well presented by Tatiana, and the models that our main departments are using when sample collecting I wanted to briefly share this idea that I had. I think that the state inspectors, not the labs, should be doing sample collection. We are stepping away from this model when the labs are collecting samples. But considering all the issues discussed today, I think at the initial phase, it is okay for the state inspectors to do the sample collection. But in the future, to take the workload on the operators, because that also puts extra costs on the dairy products. I think inspectors should do milk collection samples not maybe every month, but maybe once every 3 months. Because for somatic cell count, we can take 2 months or 3 months, sorry, average data. And for the TBC, it's 2 months data. So perhaps in the future, we can use operators for sample collection, but only to those who have really high hygiene standards. Okay, regarding this question that you asked, in Order 118, it clearly specifies, there is section 4.8, that the sample collection should be done at the technological units. So if this is a small household farm up to 3 cows, we need to understand that these farms who want to sell their milk, not for their own consumption, but they want to sell, they need to comply with the law requirements. They have to be registered. Their animals have to be subject to the state veterinary and sanitary control. So if it is 1 to 3 cows, the milk should be brought to the milk collection point, and the batch is formed in the milk collection points. And according to the law, number 771, there are clear definitions of what the batch is and what is the cargo batch. And in this case, a cargo batch can be a combined milk that is collected at the collection point. And when we started to export honey, for example, there was the similar question when we collect the sample from the general batch. We had European inspectors asking us, how do you identify which honey comes from which farm? So it's a similar situation. Perhaps the milk collection points, if I brought like 1 tank of milk from my 3 cows, this is my batch. And you collect a sample from this container, or you can take a sample from the cargo batch, a larger cargo batch. And it was interesting what Irina said about the European experience in when the samples are collected in the flow. And I saw such farms, such companies, but they're not using the equipment, and I'm not sure why. Perhaps we can identify those operators that can do that, and then we will reduce the number of costs and trips. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I'm thinking in this case, the samples should be collected at the milk collection points. Yes, thank you, Oksana, for responding to that question. And I think the slide demonstrates this process very well, and it shows when and how the samples should be collected at the milk collection point. So it's a combined sample, but each small farmer also brings their milk to be sampled, and it's stored at the milk collection point. And if there are any issues raised, according to the traceability principle, the investigation will be done to identify the bad sample. Sorry, I raised my hand again. I want to say that I want to correct what you said. Not in case of non-compliance, but the milk collection point should have information on every milk supplier, on everyone. And in the case when a particular supplier they have like 550,000 like a higher indicator. So they're in the risk zone, and they will have to bring their samples every day then of a certain frequency so that they're motivated to raise their standards of hygiene. Because if they're aware that they're in the risk zone, their milk, no matter whether it's 3 cows or 20 cows, their milk will not be accepted. Thank you for that clarification. Irina, you wanted to comment as well? Yes, thank you. I only wanted to add that this infographics that you see on the slide was developed in the framework of preparing the new order, identifying the hygiene requirements to the small farmer. And you know that there are some farms that are defined as farms that have one or more animals. So the small ones have to comply with the requirements of Order 118 with the same frequency, using same indicators as large farms. But at the same time, we also have Order 17 and 18. And together with the working group at the Ministry of Economy, the requirements have been revised, and we are waiting for their publication very soon, their approval. So this infographics was developed to explain how these smaller operators should comply with the raw control milk procedures. And it clearly states that a small farm is the one who has up to 5 cows. More than 5 cows, then the Order 118 applies. So the smaller farms have this flexibility. As Oksana said, the combined batch is sampled, but if incompliance is identified in the general batch, then for that case, the milk collection point should have the procedures in place to have individual samples from each small farmer. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Otherwise, the milk collection point will have to close down because of some incompliant suppliers. Absolutely, I agree with that. We have one legislation, and if you are using any food product for yourself, you don't have to test it, of course, but if you want to sell it, you have to comply with the law. So same requirements apply, and this quality indicator are critical because they are indicating the safety, not just the quality. Thank you, Oksana. We have question in the chat, and I see 2 more hands raised. Following up on this explanation, we have a question. What is the representative sample? If at the production unit, the farm is using 2 to 3 chilling tanks, or one legal entity has several production sites. So what should be considered as a representative sample in this case? Well, I don't see a problem here because it's an unexpected sampling, irregular sampling. So you can decide yourself. If we take an operator at the tanks, they are doing the samples after it is chilled by the drop method. So you can decide which tanks will be used for sampling and which production site. The point is not about that. The point is that we need to clearly know which farm is sampled, if I understand correctly the question. Well, if I understand the question, then in the dairy module, the way it is working, that it's not the operator who is registered, but it's the production unit. So if the operator has several production units, they are registered as 2 units in the dairy module. So they have to have separate registrations of the production unit. And it would be good in our raw milk control program to have methodology instructions how to prepare the combined sample. We have some noise coming through. Because in Switzerland, these requirements exist. They use some manual sampling as well. And at the first event in 2020, our international consultant, Isabel Lescher, presented there's a manual sampling procedure, how the combined sample is done. And I want to remind you that the dairy module, even if it do sample from every tank, and for each tank do the sampling act, it will still calculate the rolling geometric average. So it is still, it will be an average indicator. But in our module, we have the yellow highlight feature when the actual value exceeds the threshold, and it's a point of attention. It's like a red flag for the market operator, because if they have to pay a higher price for their internal control, I think if they have 2 to 3 tanks, they can afford that. I think it's a good question, and we need to put it into the concept and methodological recommendations how this should be done in the raw milk control program. Thank you, Irina. I see that Alexander from Sumy Regional Lab wants to speak. Yes, go ahead. Hello. I want to thank you for giving me the floor. I'm the director of the regional lab in Sumy Oblast. I have a question about sample collection. I want to say that there is no single regional or inter-district lab that would have departments for sample collection. We have departments for registering samples, and the duties have been given to the staff of these departments to do the collection, and they do that. But their main job is to register all the samples that come to the lab. And I want to say that the large number of tests is done on the veterinary medicine supervision that we do as the authorized lab, and our specialists should be involved in those sampling as well, not always but very frequently. So if you also put responsibility on our staff to do the sample collection, we cannot physically handle this workload. So I think it would be good to engage not only the lab technicians, but also authorized vets and market operators, because even if we have vehicles available physically, we won't be able to do that in one day, making trips, because we have 3 to 4 vehicles going to other sampling in addition to the milk control program. When you asked about the optimizing lab network, we said that if you downsize it, we will need to organize logistics point for sampling and delivering samples, not just milk, other samples. Then the workload will be much smaller for everyone involved. So I think this logistic hubs or points are a good idea, and I know they exist in Europe, and perhaps we should move towards that target.
Ще, можливо, в когось є думка?
Okay, thank you. Any other ideas? Just to add here, we have inter-rayon labs with just 5-6 staff, and sample collection is not their primary function. If everyone goes to take samples, who will be doing the tests? We have to consider this. Just to wrap it up a bit, the key idea has been that lab professionals better understand how to properly prepare the tools, the vessels, how to do the cooling chain, and so on. But I think with proper training of people with comparable qualifications, it won't be a problem. Yeah, I support this. I also think this is a good idea. Really, inspectors are the ones entrusted with sample collection now, but if we check for this European concept, the sample collection should be in the best interests of farmers themselves. And the question is not to bypass the law, but to ensure proper sanitation and safety standards in production, during the sample taking, and so on. And this will be a win-win situation also for the farmers themselves. That way they will be providing samples that correspond to requirements. You know, I've heard all of you, and I'd say I support Alexander Ivanovich's position. That has been my position since the first time. Unfortunately, I was not heard at the beginning, but that's another point. I think locally, everyone has to check exactly the local circumstances in terms of the workload per one inspection officer, in terms of the number of facilities one has to visit. Sometimes they may not be able to pay a visit to each of them. Not speaking of properly taking samples. And I think each department, each local department has to look into their circumstances and decide what is more expedient. Should they engage more operators? It will depend how we will provide this correlation between the sample collection and the indicators, the values we receive, and real situation considerations. Maybe it will be necessary to carry out some investigations to dig deeper and to come up with a most appropriate solution based on that. How to properly comply with the requirements and responsibilities. We do understand that everyone, farmers primarily, is interested in getting right results. And under the law, we are to provide the state controlling authorities with relevant information. And this should be reliable information. But for state control, separate samples have to be taken by dedicated professionals. Yeah, thank you, Mikola. Irina, you wanted to chime in? I would, but checking the time, I decided I shouldn't. Okay, then we move on to other problem matters. I tried to make them into one slide, but these are about labs. The participants mentioned it, that many labs do not have recommended methods how to do SCC and TBC tests. And this is a matter of to be decided. Another problem is growing workload on lab professionals. This is what Sumy Regional Laboratory Director mentioned. There are also questions regarding technical support of labs with necessary equipment and expendables. And there is a question of involving labs in the peer review testing. And before ushering in the discussion, I'd like to give the floor to Sumy Oblast Department. They provide some specific examples of how these problem issues relate to the situation on site. So please. You know, actually, no one is eager to collect those samples because this means additional workload for the labs, for vet clinics, and clinics are in worse condition. They may have even less personnel available than 5 or 6 lab staff. And it also depends on the distance. So without going for too long, actually I said a lot already, but I can tell you that the program, while can be implemented, won't be as successful without proper technical support. We still have many more questions than we have answers. From my experience, we switched on this dairy module in a matter of a couple, maybe 3 months. It has been mostly due to involvement of local level professionals, heads of administrations, lab directors, the staff members, the level of authority. It all helped. There were some cases, I mentioned them. I'd like to thank our colleagues from other oblasts who really were understanding and able to support, even if they weren't introducing the system immediately there. Because whenever a producer, a FBO, would say that, okay, I'm going to use another processing plant and in another oblast because they do not require those sample testing routines there, we would sometimes enjoy cooperation from that oblast to ensure that people don't do it. Sometimes I had to be involved in that personally. But for the most part, again, it was done by local professionals owing to their own image and level of authority. Let me also tell you that financial considerations also are important. Most of inter-rayon labs are willing to join the program. They surely have more workload, as Alexander mentioned, because they have to participate in other monitoring programs as well, with greater workloads there. But again, there is a question of proper transportation. Providing with transport is crucial. Dear Vitaly, you provided examples of how other labs' involvement and problems with them being not accredited to use certain methods. And I remember how you explained ways of potentially stimulating them, incentivizing them to engage, and we had a slide on that. I do understand Irina, you know, when she said that these labs can be provided with permits to do the tests. I think this may not linger forever without greater success. Initially, I suggested that a timeline should be established. Initially, I said about somewhere in 2022. Now, I would say that the transition period should be extended probably to 2024, the beginning of it, to give this transition time to find proper labs. When it may be possible to adapt, to undergo certain training. It would be nice. Now we have all labs on board. Two of them are exclusively dealing with sample collection for the most part and sometimes transporting. Two labs do the microbiological testing. These are the labs that are located at a greater distance. So they do certain tests a couple of times a month, and on another occasion, they transport the samples to another lab, which is properly authorized and accredited to do the somatic cell count. So those authorized to do total bacterial count, they do it on location, and for SCC, they have another lab. So this simplifies the logistics somehow. We have a lab that is going to be accredited. They have been given 3 months to correct some inconsistencies, and they will be good. And I do know they had no problems with the SCC test. Another lab is going to be accredited this spring, and 2 more are going to be accredited in summer. It cannot be done sooner, not because they are not willing it. It's a matter of the price of it, because they have to pay 30, 40, 50,000 hryvnias to be accredited for a specific indicator, and there is a huge queue of them. They're staying in line waiting to be accredited. And they're being given dates when they can be accredited, and they're told that it cannot be done any sooner. So this is to say that labs are interested in doing those tests in the scope of the project. Yes, because the labs not able to do these tests have to bring samples elsewhere. This is why they definitely want to get accredited. Yeah, we do understand you. Now I think we understand you that you have to sort out this logistical thing and accreditation thing among the labs. I see the hand from Oksana from the central office. Maybe she wants to comment. But before that, Oksana, just a sec. I just wanted to give the example of another lab in Donetsk Oblast. They said that they have labs using not recommended methods, yet participating in peer review sessions to show they nevertheless get consistent, reliable results.
So this is something that you wanted to confirm, or you want something else to add? What is your opinion on giving other labs this transition period, a determined transition period? Well, no way. There is no question asked about it. We either use state standards or other alternative methods, but these methods have to be validated. They have to be included into the accreditation, and they need to be confirmed based on the professional testing. If such results are confirmed, then this approach should be used for all lab tests. Otherwise, this is out of question. Thank you, Oksana. And I see Donetsk Oblast raised their hand. Yes, I want to specify our labs are accredited according to Ukrainian state standards, the STU, and they participate in professional testing rounds. So we are talking about these particular labs to allow them for a transition period to work with the dairy module, so that more market operators can be engaged. In our oblast, we don't have powerful processing companies. We have only small farms, or we have operators with small herds, small number of animals. So it's a very relevant topic for us because transporting samples and sample collection is a problem for these small farms. And they're ready to participate in the dairy module, but sample collection and transportation is difficult for them, and they want the labs to do that. And we do have authorized labs, and we have labs who are accredited based on national methods. Thank you. We understand your point. I want to add regarding TBC, total bacterial count. Some labs are using Ukrainian standards, the STU, and as alternative methods, they're very similar as ISO method. But regarding the somatic cell count, it is more problematic because we need to know the number of somatic cells, a specific number. Unfortunately, the Ukrainian standards that are used in Ukraine now, it's a qualitative methods, and sensitivity is 500,000 of somatic cells. And when we need to identify the number below 500,000 up to 400,000, these methods cannot be used, unfortunately. Alternative methods, other automated methods can be used that can do the qualitative testing for somatic cell counts. On this slide, you see the example from Sumy Oblast. We have discussed it already, that the farms, especially smaller farms, cannot always afford transportation costs and sample collection costs. And this slide has specific figures on the costs, and the labs are raising this question regarding the lab network expansion, because sometimes it's a high distance and the producers have to pay more for transportation and sample collection more than the actual testing. That's why we have such questions. I would like to respond a little bit. Colleagues, we may have two solutions for this question, and I suggest to discuss them when Mykola Vasilyevich talks about this document, because it has to be a consolidated decision made by the State Food Safety Service. Also the participants of the working group and the National Research Institute, but of course we can work on changing the concept, but we can work with what we already have, and we can work on amending Order 118, and then it will be this transition point, because Order 118 was all amended with the implementing regulation 627 in terms of the methods used. I want to ask if Alla Bursheva is with us. Yes. Yes, thank you for being with us. If you remember yesterday, we had another question from the participants about reference samples for somatic cell count. Can you comment on that? What is the situation in Ukraine? Can these reference samples be obtained? Or perhaps Institute can take this responsibility to prepare these reference samples. Hello, I want to start my presentation with saying that our institute is ready to organize the tests and training for all the specialists if there is a need for that. Regarding the reference samples, there are several responses, and I think what I will say first is most appropriate, that we need to use the certified standard samples. Currently, it is not possible to obtain them in Ukraine. They can be obtained in Europe because preparation is a bit complex. And our department cannot ensure sample stability for a certain time limit. So standard samples should be obtained in Europe. If there is no possibility to do that, there is another option, which is participating in the vet test at least 2 times per year. And these samples can be considered as a reference or control samples if you cannot buy the certified samples. Another option is more complex, is using real samples that have been submitted for testing. But in this case, you need to have at least 10 control samples that have to be tested in 2 parallels, and average arithmetic value has to be calculated, and control sample cannot be stored for more than a month, and it's very work intensive process. So first option, using certified standard samples, is the most appropriate one in my view. Also, yesterday I had a question about the sterile containers for somatic cell count. I want to stress that somatic cell count is not a microbiological test. So it does not require complete sterility. This method is based on calculating all the cells with the cores like lymphocytes, etc. So it's sufficient to have clean and dry container, but it is not required to have a sterile container. Thank you, Alla, for this detailed question. I want to add, if a lab decides to prepare control samples, it can be done. And sample preparation methods are also outlined in methodological recommendations mentioned by the State Institute. But the best solution, of course, will be to buy certified samples, because a sample, to be considered a reference standard sample, it has to go through the proper sample prep. They also have to be samples with different somatic cell count levels, and these samples have to be stable and homogeneous. So a sample that, meaning no matter which part of the sample you take, it will provide the same number of cells. And stability means that in a certain timeline, it's not going to lose its feature. Thank you. Maybe we have more questions about the lab operations. If not, I think we can move to our next section. I present the map here on the slide, which shows the number of registered operators or production capacities by oblasts. We saw this map yesterday, but I want to show it again to kind of motivate you to share best practices. It would be good to hear the operators, the milk producers. What problems do you encounter? Why don't you want to join the dairy module? And if you did join, do you have any difficulties, any challenging things that you encounter? We already heard from 3 oblasts, Vinnytsia, Poltava, and Sumy, when colleagues from the departments of the state service described how this program is implemented in their regions. Perhaps we have others who would like to share. their best practices. So operators are encouraged to speak up. I think everyone is tired. We saw quite a few market operators registered from Zaporizhia Oblast. Perhaps some of you can share why have you not participated in the raw milk control program and the dairy module? I see a hand raised. Igor Prisяжнюк, go ahead. Of course, I cannot speak for all the market operators. I think everyone have to speak for themselves. But perhaps this is a suggestion or a request to the public sector participants. When you come to the market operator, I'm not going to name any names. This is just an abstract example. When you come to an operator and you're saying you are obliged because there is this law and you have to pay a lot of money for this, trust me, they will not be motivated to do this, even if you apply this pressure. We are living in the 21st century. So the approach has to be very different. You need to show them, and we as the association, we also explain to them, yes, there is the legal requirement, but there are benefits that you will gain. You will benefit because you will see your indicators, whether your cows are healthy, what you need to pay attention to. So we show them that it is beneficial for them, first of all, economically beneficial. And then their attitude will be much different and much better. But if you just apply this pressure that it is your obligation, you know, their natural response is to resist. So my proposal is that you need to explain to the operators the benefits because they don't understand. And when you just say there is this law that requires to do this, if you don't do this, I will close you down, well, they will resist. But if you explain to them that you will gain from this and this, there are these advantages, you will be able to be better in your operations, and it provides a specific economic benefits, more people will be joining. They don't want to join out of obligation. Thank you, Igor. I think we come back to this point of communication and how important that is. Yes, that's the most important. To talk to people and to talk to them not from the position of power, but from the position of partnership. And based on what I heard today, I understand that it's hard for the labs to take on this sample collection duty, and inspectors also struggle. So my proposal, you are the most distributed network in Ukraine. There are only two, like police and emergency service, that are so well represented. You have an official vet in each oblast. You can make them authorized for sample collection. They know very well the directors of the farms, and they can agree on the logistics, and there will be no violations because the delegates will be doing the sampling. But when the farms do the sampling, it is the violation of the state control. So if your representative comes and collects the sample, the chief vet will sit in the same car, or they will deliver the sample. You just need to talk in a friendly way and to perceive it as partnership. That's all it takes.
Чули сьогодні і від Сумської, і від Вінницької, від Полтавської
Yes,
області.
you are right. We've heard it from Sumy, Poltava Oblast, that communication has become for them the vehicle for involvement of FBOs. And I see a hand from Oksana. Dear Igor, I'd like to address you directly. The whole work of the food safety service is based on collaboration and interaction. And even now in this project, with involvement from it, we are carrying out explanatory work and explanatory activities and awareness raising on our website and all the portals about the dairy module, and we try to be as involved as possible. And we also have associations like yours, and I think one of the key functions of associations, industry associations, is to provide FBOs with the latest updates about legislative requirements. And our function as the service is to ensure proper state control of compliance. Thank you. But we've been doing it from the day one of the dairy module. We are involved. We are holding tons of events. But again, you say you do as much as you can. Do you have any idea how many people actually visit your resources? Well, you can check for 177 participants in this event. But who are they? How many farmers are among them? Well, we have on-site trainings, we have visits, and the Swiss project has been doing it for some years. Yeah, I do understand this. I do understand this. But you are not visiting the association's website, as associations are not frequenting yours. I don't think we have to quarrel over it. No, this is not about quarreling or having anything like that. Igor, are you to say that everyone checks the Facebook page of the service? I think, you know, nearly everyone has the Facebook page of their own now, and we had proper notification of the event on everyone's Facebook page, and we will upload all the materials. I'd really love to have this statistic to see how people follow the announcements, how they use the materials. We've had 24 seminars, and the service guys may correct me, but I think we had representatives of 1,700 farming economies. So the situation stands as follows. We have 10 minutes till the end of the event. Do we have any more questions to look into? Well, we have some technical things. First of all, milk sample collection and state control. Is it a state control measure? And what is the interval between two TBC related samples? How often these have to be taken? It should be done twice a month, and the national standard of Ukraine specifies a 10-day interval between them. But again, there is an announced collection of samples. As regards the state control, I can take this. I've said it several times. This is not about state control measures because these are different. Ukraine has always been trying to find their own unique way of state control. And we are used to having state control measures done with as announced activity, which is unique, I think, across the world. No one does it as pre-announced activity. But anyway, state control is a very specific function, and this is what international laws require if we want to be civilized, if we want to be able to export our products elsewhere. We need to understand that our laws have to be uniform for local producers, for importers, for exporters. only then it may be regarded as the proper law in compliance with international legislation. So again, the state control is done by state inspectors and state inspectors.
Враховується відповідно до чинного законодавства.
And the results are taken into account in line with legislative requirements. So, dear Iga, I did not expect those words from you. You tend to think that the food safety service works differently. Everything has changed, you know. The state veterinary and sanitation department we used to have, it was completely different structure, completely different body. So I think we have to find communication, way of communicating with you to move forward with. Mykola, thank you for your remark. If you remember, Article 40 says about the state control of raw milk and colostrum. And the Europeans say that there should be a competent authority to do monitoring of compliance. And the requirements for compliance requirements are mentioned in 118. The question is whether the competent authority has access to the data from those labs. That was one of the remarks from the experts from Israel and Canada. It was probably also the biggest concern voiced by European. The competent authority has to be able to assess information on non-compliance and has to be able to immediately react to that. So, dear Tatiana from Chernivtsi, you heard it, yeah? At least 10-day interval between the samples. This is the basis to decide on the schedule of sample collection. And Mykola, just to summarize, can you tell us about next steps and what has been already formalized by the food service, food safety service? Well, we had a directive issued for that purpose, and a roadmap was designed with specific roles for every participant. So I'd like to address main departments. You have to make this information known to every stakeholder. I mean the information and the directive. I'd like to further ask that there is an algorithm, the action algorithm, the one that we've heard about, that we've discussed, like we heard from Vitaly, from Natalia, from Poltava Oblast department. So whenever an inspector is at his office space, at his place, then the work goes on as intended. If things go out of order, then the main department may engage. But again, with inspectors willing and working and doing what they are supposed to do, everything will go fine. And you can always find some points of cohesion. Because of that, I think everyone has to be notified properly about the latest updates. And the working group should sit, I think, at least once a month. And we will be hearing about the progress with certain matters. So I'd really ask everyone to be responsible, to make the, stock taking, to probably get together via Zoom with everyone involved. If you have to do it locally, please do. If you want our involvement, You are mostly welcome. I think the project might join and engage as well, because it's the matter of national importance that we are doing together. And rather than trying every time to find the guilty party, we simply need to focus on real work. We need to be willing jointly to ensure quality products for domestic production, for exports. So I invite everyone to cooperation, to tedious work, to responsible position. And I suggest you contact with designated officers in the central office, as said in the directive. Okay, thank you, Mikola. It's already time to close up the event. And I'd like to give the floor to Marco Di Nardi to do the wrap up. But again, before that, we were not able to start the technical round of discussion on the Milk Act. This concerns the using of the dairy module by the inspector. And there are some 15 key questions, as well as the questions you posted in questionnaires. The Food Safety Service has a work group with representatives of oblasts working there. Suggest we meet in the work group at 9 o'clock on 22nd of February. And I suggest that I circulate these questions among work group participants for us to sit together and to decide it, and to think how the information can be included in the dairy module with UID codes there, and to see that the data are automatically used in the Act enshrined in Order 490. We need to ensure that inspectors are most comfortable in doing their responsibilities. And we need to ensure that the data in the dairy model are fully valid and usable. So I suggest to working group colleagues to share this information with your labs. We heard from Sumy, Mykolaiv labs, and please, Mykola, invite the people from your lab. It will take just an hour for all of us to look on the menu. Sorry, not definitely the menu, but the list of questions. We'd like just to hear from you whether you want it as a drop-down box or otherwise, and do we need to show the batch volume or not, in line with the 490 section. So it's just a technical thing that we have to do, but we have to do a discussion before that. And again, Marco, please, what is your opinion about this event, please?
Well, thanks, Irina, for giving the chance to say a few things, a few remarks. Well, to follow up on Mykola introduction, I think he clearly mentioned also the importance of the roadmap. The roadmap is a tool in the hands of the stakeholders to pave the way for the success of the control program at a national level. But the key word is really the collaboration. I mean, all stakeholders should collaboratively work towards the success of the control program. It's not, there is no reason to work in silage, in separate unit. All should collaborate in this. And I think this is very, very clear. The roadmap provide clear indication on who is supposed to do a specific task along clear timelines. And as we are already in February 2022, there are some specific activities foreseen in the roadmap, which are already ongoing. But I just want to mention, like, for example, the revision of the legislation. This is a key aspect which are constantly working. The revision of the dairy module technical specification is due in this period, and it's something we are definitely, you have already highlighted the importance of this. And this is something which is currently ongoing. Today we have been discussing a lot about sample taking, sample transport, how to manage the sample. So we believe there is a clear need for the development of SOPs, which gives clear indication on all of this. This is ongoing. Some of these SOPs were developed, others will be developed, and I think it's a very important aspect. And of course, we will have further meetings. We will have further discussion on all the aspects which were raised in these 2 very important days. We have a lot to think about, I think, as a team. You raise a lot of very relevant issue. We took note of all the relevant issues, so you will hear from us about strategy to address some of this issue. But as a very conclusive remark, I would like to stress that what becomes very clear for me is that you already own the raw milk control program. So as a stakeholders all engaged in a collaborative framework, it is clear that you are dedicated to this, and it's clear that you are owning the progress of this process, which was the most ambitious of our objectives. And I'm very proud, as I already said, to witness that this is happening, and this is a very great achievement. And I think we are definitely on the right pathway to the success. There are a lot of obstacles, a lot of limitation, a lot needs to be done, but we are in the right path, and I am very thankful for this. So with this, I would just like to say thanks again also to the team in Ukraine, which is, as usual, is doing a great job. I would also like to thank the contribution from the state service, which has been very, very active and helping us quite a lot, and from all the stakeholders. We are very happy also to have welcome in our team Tatiana, which is really helping us in also following up on the roadmap implementation. So you will hear from Tatiana often, just to be sure that the roadmap is implemented, because the roadmap is a sequence of steps, and when one of the steps is stopped, then all the second steps will not work. So we need to be fluent there. Okay, so yes, with this, thank you again. I would like to give the floor to Irina for the last conclusive remarks, and thank you again.
Дуже дякую, Марко. Я думаю, що ти якраз усі крапки поставив над «і».
Thank you very much, Marco. I think you have really summarized it so well. Everyone feels ownership and being part of this process, and we are also very grateful for the support of the state food safety service. I encourage you to remain open for our further communications, and I see a lot of messages in the chat where you can get presentations and recordings. Once again, they're available on our website, and we have talked to the colleagues from the state service. We will have a joint publication about this 2-day seminar with all the links where you can get the access to the video and presentations. Follow up on the website of the state service. Have this as a habit to regularly check their website. Thank you, colleagues. We complete our event today, and let's make another group photo. Please turn on your camera. I want to see your